Hey everybody, welcome back to Mastering Rod Building. I'm your host, Bill Faulkner. Really excited about our topic today. It's a brand new, to me, niche of rod building that I have really been exploring heavily for about the last 2 months, and that's BFS, or bait finesse system angling. So before we get started on the rods, what is BFS? So it was developed in Japan. An excellent reference is Bait Finesse Empire or bfs-troutlures.com. It's essentially ultralight bait casting. One of the things that's been fascinating to me about BFS angling, to be honest, I got into it because a customer of ours at Anglers Resource was working on a BFS development project, said, can we send you some blanks? Will you build them and see what you would recommend for guide setup, handle length, guide placement, this kind of thing? And of course I said yes. And then I really went down this rabbit hole and got fascinated by it. And so I was not only building their blanks, I was buying other blanks, I was putting a lot of blanks to the test. Getting into the rods, like any rod build, the heart of a BFS rod is the blank. And so I've used no less than about 40 blanks. Some of them sold as ultralight spinning, some of them sold as ultralight casting, some of them sold as spinning or casting blanks, but not necessarily ultralight. Some of them sold as fly rod blanks in both carbon fiber, composite, and fiberglass, excuse me. So I've kind of come to develop an opinion about the blanks based on the application, right? So typically, anywhere you ultralight fish, anywhere you fish, you can BFS fish. But obviously the gear is a little different. If you're in a tiny little, North Carolina stream you can jump across fishing for native brook trout, that's very different than when I'm fishing in Perdido Bay, in the saltwater, or on the White River in Arkansas, or on Lake Gunnersville for bass, right? And the BFS is extremely effective in all these environments, right? So you really have to understand how you're fishing, right? And for me, I'm mostly fishing larger rivers, larger ponds, lakes, or bays and open water. I'm not personally fishing a bunch of really tight, small streams, although BFS can be extremely effective for that kind of a technique. So I'm choosing the rod blank that I'm using based on how I'm fishing. And Jack Barron, our marketing director at Anglers Resource, who was an angler at Montevallo, very serious bass fisherman, he's gone right along with me on this. Aaron Lowe, the director of sales, and Jack and I got to spend some time in Arkansas recently, and we got after it with the BFS gear for 4 days straight, and we learned a lot, right? And I think, sort of speaking on behalf of all of us, where our kind of opinion and appetite has gone is there's really two ways you're typically fishing with this BFS gear. The first is with a single hook rig, right? So the one that comes immediately to mind is like a Ned rig, right? So just a small jig head with a small plastic. Smaller size jig minnows or hover strolling rigs. Hair jigs or marabou jigs, absolutely dynamite on the BFS gear, but that action is maybe a little faster, and even though we're using light gear, you still often have to set the hook. Slightly different presentation. So I would say there's one class of blank that's a little firmer, to me needs to be a little faster, that's for a single hook application. The other application, which is also extremely effective and a lot of fun, is kind of what I would characterize as moving baits, or generally baits that have treble hooks, right? So top waters, jerk baits, crankbaits, lipless crankbaits, micro swim baits, which I love, and also micro chatterbaits, which so far, as nearly as I can tell, catch everything that swims in freshwater and saltwater. So if you can, you want to have a complete, well-rounded arsenal, two rods, one that's a little bit softer for moving baits and treble hooked baits and rigs is a good thing to have, and one that's a little firmer, a little stiffer, a little faster, near the same power, but just a different action, I find to be very useful, and I think Jack and Aaron have found that as well. In terms of length, there's sort of no rules. Like the traditional rods in Japan, 6'3", 6'6", even 6'8", they go down to less than 4 feet. I mean, again, it depends on the application you're fishing. What I'm finding really useful on these bigger rivers and more open water, farm ponds, things like that, 5'9" to 5'11" seems to be a real sweet spot. It does everything well. It casts easily one-handed. You get a good mix of casting distance and the ability to work the bait. And so if you're not sure where to start, it's just my opinion, but I've been really, really pleased with those rods that I've built in the 5'9", 5'11" range for general BFS use. If you're thinking about dipping your toe in the water, building one rod, giving it a try. That's great. Another thing that's really interesting about these rods is, unlike a lot of the other rods, other than fly rods, many of the best blanks are all one piece, right? Or that's the only offering for a specific application. We don't see a lot of multi-piece drop shot rods. We don't see a lot of multi-piece, live scope dedicated rods or swim bait rods. In the BFS space, based on how light the power of these rods are, there's some very good rods that are 2-piece, 3-piece, 4-piece. And so it warrants mentioning that it's kind of a fun thing. We've taken to always having one broken down in the car. Some of these things will fit in your glove box. Certainly they'll fit in the seat pocket behind the driver's seat in my car. And it's kind of fun to have a rod with you everywhere you go. Small box of baits, and you drive by some place that looks pretty promising, you can stop and throw a few casts. So now we've got our blank. We're thinking about maybe a single hook rig, maybe some moving baits, and you can have crossover between these rods. We know we want them, we're gonna try around 5.9 to 5.11 for our first one, and we know we can have it as a one piece or a multi-piece. How about the handles and reel seats? So here's where we kind of diverge. You have some options here. The very traditional Japanese way to make a BFS rod, and still a very common way for trout-based BFS rods to be made, is with a highly figured wood insert and high quality cork grips with a metal skeleton. These grips were sort of made famous in my mind initially by Andrews Fishing in Japan, and now being carried on by Just Ace, a Japanese company that makes products in China. And I got these seats from Casey Portier at Voodoo Rods. They're available in either gunmetal or what they call a champagne, which is kind of a light matte gold. Makes for a very pretty rod, highly figured wood insert, and they feel great and they fish well. The other way to build them, in my opinion, or the direction we've gone, is kind of what I would call the F1 race car method, which is the lightest possible, most sensitive handle you can get, which includes a Fuji titanium carbon hybrid flat back casting seat, carbon fiber grip, and a light, reasonably sized butt cap, short foregrip, and this is also a wonderful way to build the rods. If I had to pick one, I'm probably favoring this, but I'd be lying if I said I don't really enjoy building on the Just Ace handles. One of the things that's different about these rods is, and the reels, if you try to double hand cast these rods, you're going to overpower the reel. And I won't go into reels because there's a lot of information out there on YouTube and at Bait Finesse Empire and some of these other sites where you can learn a lot about reels. There's a YouTube channel in particular called RAWR Fishing, R-A-W-R Fishing. Jimmy runs a great channel. He does tons of test casting of a reel, side-by-side comparisons. It's a great source of information. Check it out. But the reels are designed to have like zero startup inertia. They're highly specialized. They're to throw very light baits like this homemade micro chatterbait with a plastic trailer on very light line. If you try to overhand cast them or double hand cast them, you're gonna overwhelm the reel and backlash it every single time. So the casting stroke ends up being a softer one-handed stroke. And as part of that, I tend to favor a shorter grip. I find about a 5.5 to 6.5 inch butt grip balances most of these rods, if not all of them, in the 5.9 to 5.11 length, and provides really good combination of casting distance, comfort, and fish fighting ability. Do you have to use just these two configurations? Absolutely not. You can use whatever you want. You can use regular cork, even just EVA grips that you buy pre-made or shape yourself are also very effective. But keeping that butt grip length a little shorter, I think you'll find will be beneficial. So that just leaves us with the guide train. And so given that it's an inherently a conventional revolving spool reel kind of setup, it begs the question, do we go spiral or do we go guides on top? I've built them both ways, and the reality is it's such a light application. I don't find much difference in measurable casting distance, measurable performance. So that being said, I do feel like I tip wrap a little less with this gossamer thin line and leader with the spiral wrap. So I am personally favoring a spiral wrap, but you can go either way. Really what also defines that for me, is I'm generally able to use one guide fewer, which reduces weight and livens up the action of the rod relative to one that has more thread, more finish, and more guides. So to me, that's reason enough to go spiral, but you can build them either way. In terms of guide size, you don't need a lot. I've experimented with a bunch of different systems, and what I'm favoring is starting with the high frame size 6 first stripping guide or reduction guide, and then just stepping them down. If I'm using a spiral, I'm going 6, 6, 5, 5, 5, and then 4.5 size Fuji runners out to a 4.5 ring top. If you're going guides on top, I'd recommend 6, another 6, a 5, 5, 5, and then 4.5s out to a 4.5 tip. Some of you may be wondering, well, does it matter if I'm throwing a leader? Does it matter if I'm passing a knot? And it's a great question. You're generally going to spool these reels with either mono or fluoro or with braid and use a leader. And I've done it both ways. There's probably some personal preference there, but the versatility and the casting distance of spooling it with braid and then adding a short mono or fluorocarbon leader to me is superior. And there's any number of knots in this fine diameter line and leader that you can tie that pass very easily through a size 4.5 running guide. You could probably go smaller. It starts to get hard for me to see threading the line through the guides when I'm setting up the rod, and I stopped noticing a bunch of measurable distance in casting distance or feel or anything else, objective or subjective, when I go smaller than 4.5. So that's the way I'm setting them up. So I know we've covered a lot of information in a really short period of time. What we're going to do is post in the description of this video, or you can link to some rod building worksheets, some rod recipes and layouts we put together, along with some recommended blanks in each of these categories. But don't be afraid to experiment, because we've gotten good results from dedicated BFS blanks, from fly blanks where we only use certain sections of a 3-piece rod, the tip 2 sections of a 3-piece rod, and certainly there's a lot of really suitable ultralight and light rod blanks in both carbon, composite, and fiberglass available that you can trim to length and get a great finished product. So one of the things that you'll be shocked at if you're just getting into bait finesse angling is the diversity of lures and types of lures that are out there, right? And I would, if I had to simplify it, I would say generally there's lures dedicated towards freshwater trout, and then there's lures dedicated towards kind of bass, panfish, everything else. The lures fall into the same categories you're used to. Some of the most fun that I've had is micro topwaters. So this is a 60 millimeter walk the dog type topwater. Here's a tiny little megabass baitfish popper. I know this is one of Jack's favorites. Probably one of the most effective things. If you've never tried this and you want to see what it's capable of in your home waters, just get a pack of these. This is the Z-Man. Z-Man has a whole series of micro finesse baits. These happen to be tiny ticklers with a Z. And if you just put this on a small micro finesse Ned head, crazy effective. You want to see a bait that gets bit every bite by whatever's swimming in whatever water you're fishing, this is a great one. Part of why I really like the Z-Mans is because they're made with the TPE super plastic, they float, and so that buoyancy helps slow your fall, and that seems like that's a real key thing. The fish have a hard time laying off that bait on the fall. And then, you know, another one, if you just want to tie something simple on and go out and fish, is a marabou jig or a hair jig. You can throw these, depending on your setup, anywhere to a 64th of an ounce, a 32nd of an ounce, you know, most commonly a 16th to an 1/8 of an ounce probably, but wildly effective, very easy to either tie your own or buy pre-made, and super, super effective. And then I'd probably be remiss if I didn't at least point out the bait that's been sort of the shocker of all the finesse BFS baits, but that's the micro chatterbait. There's a discontinued bait in Japan called a Mukai bee chatter, and you can still find them in a few places, but the Mukai bee chatter, I got my hands on a couple and it was so effective, and then I lost them. I set about to try to make my own micro, and I found a video on YouTube by Jimmy at Rar Fishing where he shows you one way you can make a micro chatterbait, and I basically started following his recipe, and I've been tweaking them and swim testing them ever since. But if you've never fished one of these little bladed kind of naked chatterbait tipped with a plastic, it's give it a try, because so far I think we've got walleye, white bass, black bass, spotted bass, catfish, speckled trout and redfish and flounder, and Spanish mackerel and lizardfish and pinfish and mangrove snapper, and I could go on. Like everything that we've thrown it at, crappie, everything eats it. Big bluegills. So don't sleep on the micro chatterbait. That's a great choice as well. This is really just scratching the surface. If you're interested in a much deeper dive into what bait finesse system fishing is and all the variations of it and its evolution in Japan and how it's come to the States over the last decade, check out the Mastering Rod Building podcast, where I recently hosted Amir, the owner of Bait Finesse Empire, which was the first BFS dedicated tackle store in the continental US. Great store, very knowledgeable guy, very helpful to me in my journey into BFS so far. And if you're interested in learning more, you want to get into some of the more technical and detailed aspects of it, we've got a two-part series. Part one covers the history and evolution of the technique and sort of how it's defined and used. And then part two really gets into the nitty-gritty of the rods, the actions, the powers, and different ways people are using these things. And you'll be surprised some of the things people are catching on these little bitty rods and reels, including tournament winning bags. Please be sure to check out the description. If you've got questions, you know where to find us here at the Mastering Rod Building channel, and get out there and wrap some rods. Tight lines. What have I not said? What have I forgotten? What more technical rod build? Oh, I'll do something else. My name's Ricky Bobby, and if you don't shoot Big Red, then fuck you. I'm just kidding.